Statistics paint a sobering picture. Studies show that nearly 15% of high-achieving men experience severe depressive episodes in their 40s and 50s, often linked to the relentless pressure to succeed, provide, and remain relevant. Behind the polished exteriors and professional accolades, many men silently grapple with a debilitating midlife crisis. It's a crisis that doesn't just steal peace of mind, it erodes the very foundation of self-worth. I used to think depression was something that happened to other people. I believed that as long as I worked hard enough, as long as I stayed focused and driven, I could avoid it. My life was the textbook definition of success, a thriving career, a beautiful family, and the respect of my peers. On the outside, I was the man who had it all. But on the inside, I was crumbling. It started subtly, missed deadlines that I could no longer meet with my usual enthusiasm, nights spent lying awake staring at the ceiling, wondering why I felt so empty despite having achieved everything I once dreamed of. I'd wake up every morning feeling as if a heavy weight was pressing down on my chest. My mind was a battlefield, full of racing thoughts about not being enough, not doing enough, and the sinking fear that my best days were behind me. The worst part was the shame. I couldn't admit to anyone that I felt like I was drowning. How could I? I was supposed to be strong, a leader, the one everyone counted on. My success was supposed to shield me from this kind of despair. But the truth was that every achievement, every milestone, felt hollow. I started to resent the very things I had worked so hard to build. My job felt meaningless, my relationship strained, and every day felt like I was performing a role I no longer believed in. I remember one night vividly. I came home late, as usual, and sat in my car for what felt like hours. I couldn't bring myself to go inside. My kids were asleep, my wife had stopped asking when I'd be home, and I was exhausted, not from work but from pretending. Pretending to be okay. Pretending I still had everything under control. I thought about how easy it would be to just drive away. To disappear. But even that felt like too much effort. The numbness was all-consuming. Depression in high-achieving men isn't just about feeling sad. It's about the soul-crushing realization that all the things you thought would bring you happiness, success, recognition, wealth, don't. And when you've built your identity around those things, the emptiness is unbearable. I withdrew from everyone. My friends stopped calling. I stopped caring. One morning, I stared at my reflection in the mirror and didn't recognize the man looking back. The once confident eyes were hollow. The spark was gone. I felt like a shell of who I used to be. That moment, I thought, was the lowest I could ever sink. But depression is a cruel thief. It robs you of perspective, hope, and the belief that things can ever get better. I became obsessed with the idea that I was a failure, not just in my career but as a husband, a father, a man. The breaking point came when I found myself sitting alone in my office late one night. The silence was deafening. I looked around at the awards on the wall, the framed pictures of smiling faces, and it felt like they belonged to someone else. I broke down. I sobbed until I couldn't breathe. The weight of it all, the expectations, the pressure, the unbearable loneliness, finally crushed me. I wish I could say someone noticed, that someone pulled me out of the darkness, but that's not how it happened. The world doesn't stop for men like me. I had to keep going, keep producing, keep performing. And yet, I couldn't. The mask I had worn for so long cracked, and I could no longer pretend that I was okay. I wasn't okay. I was exhausted, broken, and completely lost. If you're reading this and you feel any of this in your bones, know this, you're not alone. The struggle is real, and it's brutal. But it's not the end. I reached the point where I knew I had to make a change, but not before feeling the depths of despair. What I discovered about myself in those dark moments was the beginning of a transformation I never expected. The solutions I found didn't come overnight, and they weren't easy. But they were real. They saved my life. If you've ever wondered if it's possible to come back from the brink, to rebuild your life and find meaning again, I can tell you it is. I found a way out of the darkness. And while this isn't the place to share how I did it, just know that there is a path forward. That night in my office, after the tears had dried and the silence wrapped around me like a cold blanket, I sat there numb. I wasn't sure what scared me more, the thought of continuing this way or the thought of what might happen if I didn't. The walls I had carefully constructed around my emotions were crumbling. I realized how fragile I had become, despite all the power and control I projected to the world. I tried to make sense of what I was feeling, but nothing seemed clear. I felt like I was caught in a storm, tossed by waves of fear, doubt, and hopelessness. I thought about my younger self, the man who believed he could conquer the world, who found excitement in every challenge, who had dreams that seemed limitless. Where had that man gone? And more importantly, who had I become? I felt trapped in a life I had built with my own hands, suffocated by the very success I once craved. I felt like a stranger in my own life. Every achievement, every accolade felt distant, as though they belonged to someone else. I was drowning in expectations, those of others, yes, but mostly my own. And I had no idea how to ask for help, because to ask would be to admit weakness, wouldn't it? There were days when I couldn't even muster the energy to get out of bed. I would stare at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts that I couldn't silence. You're failing. You're a disappointment. You're not enough. I felt like I was on autopilot, going through the motions without any real connection to the world around me. I avoided my family because I couldn't bear to see the confusion in their eyes or hear the unspoken questions. What's wrong with you? Why are you so distant? One evening, my youngest child came to me with a simple request, to read a bedtime story. I looked into their eyes, saw the innocence and trust there, and felt a wave of shame so deep it threatened to crush me. I couldn't even bring myself to say yes. I made an excuse, said I was tired, and watched as they walked away, disappointed but too young to understand. The look on their face haunted me for days. I was losing everything that mattered, not because of something external but because I was imploding from within. I couldn't see a future that didn't feel bleak. Every day felt like a battle to survive, and the weight of it all was unbearable. The worst part was the isolation, the belief that no one would understand, that no one could possibly feel this way. The fear that if I admitted how broken I was, I would lose the respect of everyone around me. I wish I could say that the turning point came quickly, that there was a single moment of clarity where everything shifted, but it didn't happen that way. It was slow. Painful. There were more dark days than light ones. There were days I doubted I would ever feel joy again. I pushed people away, lashed out at those I loved, and retreated further into myself. But even in the darkest moments, a tiny voice whispered that this couldn't be the end. That voice, faint and fragile, reminded me that I had fought battles before, that I had faced challenges that seemed insurmountable. And maybe, just maybe, this was another battle I could win. But not yet. I wasn't ready to believe it fully. So I continued to drift, lost in a sea of my own despair. Each day felt like climbing a mountain with no summit in sight. Every step was heavy, every breath a reminder of how far I had fallen. But somewhere deep inside, the smallest ember of hope remained, waiting to be ignited. And though I didn't know how or when, I began to believe that there was still a chance, a possibility that the man I used to be wasn't gone forever. That maybe, just maybe, I could find him again. And that's where my story pauses, not because it ends here but because this is the moment before everything began to change. Sitting in that dark office, broken and exhausted, I didn't have a grand epiphany. There wasn't a sudden moment of clarity or a magical fix that wiped away the pain. Instead, the journey out of that pit was slow, a painstaking process that started with one small but crucial decision, acknowledging that I needed help. It wasn't a public declaration or a dramatic announcement. It was a quiet moment when I whispered to myself, I can't do this alone anymore. The next morning, I made one of the hardest phone calls of my life. I reached out to a therapist, someone who specialized in working with high-achieving men like me who had spent years wearing the mask of success while crumbling beneath it. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew I had nothing left to lose. Just making that appointment felt like a small victory, a reminder that even in my darkest hour, I still had a spark of hope. Walking into that office was terrifying. I had spent my life solving problems, fixing things, and taking control, and here I was admitting that I had no idea how to fix myself. But the room was calm, the therapist's voice steady, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't drowning. I wasn't judged. I was heard. Therapy wasn't easy. It forced me to confront the perfectionism and pressure I had lived with for so long. I had to face the harsh truth that I had tied my self-worth entirely to my achievements, and when those felt meaningless, so did I. We talked about burnout, about the relentless drive to succeed that had consumed me, and about the fear of being seen as weak. Slowly, I began to understand that I wasn't failing, I was human. But therapy was only the beginning. I needed more than just weekly sessions. I had to reclaim my life in small, intentional ways. I started with something simple, getting outside. The first day, I took a walk, just 10 minutes. The fresh air, the sound of birds, the feeling of my feet hitting the ground, it was nothing extraordinary, but it felt like breathing again after being underwater for too long. I made that walk a daily ritual, a commitment to myself that no matter how heavy the day felt, I would carve out that time. I also began to write. At first, it was just scribbles in a journal, a way to release the thoughts that swirled in my mind. I wrote about the emptiness, the anger, the fear. But over time, I noticed a shift. The words became less about what I had lost and more about what I could still gain. I wrote about the simple joys I had overlooked for so long, the way my child's laughter echoed through the house, the warmth of a cup of coffee in the early morning, the way the world seemed to slow down if I let it. As I took these small steps, I began to reach out to the people I had pushed away. It wasn't easy to admit how far I had fallen, but the surprising thing was how many of them understood. I wasn't the only one struggling, and that realization was both heartbreaking and comforting. I wasn't alone. I also learned to say no. For years, I had said yes to everything, every project, every request, believing that my worth was tied to my productivity. But now, I realized that I had the power to set boundaries. I started protecting my time, choosing to invest it in what truly mattered. I wasn't just working to survive anymore, I was learning to live again. One of the most transformative moments came when I found myself sitting at the dinner table, fully present. My phone was in another room. I wasn't thinking about work or deadlines. I was there, really there, for the first time in years. I looked around at the people who loved me, who had stood by me even when I was lost in my own darkness, and I felt something I hadn't in a long time, peace. This journey wasn't perfect. There were setbacks, days when the darkness felt overwhelming, but they became fewer. I learned to be patient with myself, to understand that healing isn't a straight line. It's a winding road with detours and unexpected turns, but it's worth every step. And here's the thing that I didn't expect, I came out the other side not just as the man I used to be, but as someone stronger, more grounded, and more alive than ever before. The depression and midlife crisis didn't define me. They shaped me, taught me, and ultimately helped me become the man I was meant to be. For anyone reading this who feels trapped in that same darkness, know this, you can find your way out. It won't be easy. It won't be quick. But it will be worth it. There are steps you can take, even if they feel small and insignificant right now. Reach out. Let someone in. Take that walk. Write those words. And if you're looking for guidance, for the practical steps that helped me rebuild my life, I want to share a resource that made all the difference. Depression and the Midlife Crisis for High-Achieving Men is not just a book, it's a lifeline. It provided the insights, strategies, and support I needed to climb out of that dark place. It showed me that I wasn't alone and that there is a path forward. You can find a digital copy at libraryffy.com, and I promise you, it's a journey worth taking. That book didn't just offer answers, it helped me ask the right questions. Questions that I hadn't dared to ask myself during the darkest moments. Questions like, who am I beyond my success? What truly matters to me? It felt like peeling back layers of armor I had worn for decades, armor I thought protected me but had actually been weighing me down. Each chapter felt like a conversation with someone who understood exactly what I was going through. It was as if the words on the page knew the exhaustion, the fear, and the emptiness that had haunted me. But instead of offering empty reassurance, the book gave me tangible steps, practical strategies that I could apply in my daily life. It showed me how to break free from the cycle of burnout and depression without expecting me to transform overnight. One of the most profound lessons I learned was how to redefine success. I had spent my entire life chasing external achievements, believing that every accolade and every milestone would fill the void inside me. But the book helped me see that true success wasn't about what I accomplished in the world. It was about finding peace within myself, about reconnecting with the things that made life meaningful. I remember one specific exercise that had a profound impact. It asked me to write down 10 things that brought me joy, not accomplishments, not career milestones, but simple, everyday pleasures. It took me hours to think of even 5. That was how disconnected I had become from myself. But as I sat there, determined to finish, I began to remember. The smell of fresh coffee in the morning. The way my child's hand felt in mine. The sound of rain tapping against the window. The process of rediscovery wasn't just about identifying those moments, it was about intentionally bringing them back into my life. And slowly, those small moments became anchors. They grounded me in the present, reminded me that life wasn't just about the next big achievement, but about the beauty in the ordinary. The book also guided me through understanding the importance of community. For so long, I had isolated myself, convinced that asking for help was a sign of weakness. But the book emphasized that connection is essential for healing. It encouraged me to seek out others who were walking a similar path, to find spaces where vulnerability was welcomed, not judged. I joined a support group for men navigating midlife transitions. At first, it felt uncomfortable, sharing my struggles with strangers wasn't something I was used to. But as I listened to their stories, I realized I wasn't alone. We shared the same fears, the same doubts, and in that shared experience, I found a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in years. There were practical tips on managing anxiety and depression, strategies that didn't require drastic changes but small shifts in perspective and behavior. One of the most impactful was learning to give myself permission to rest. For years, I had equated rest with laziness, but the book helped me understand that rest is essential. It's what allows us to show up fully in our lives, to be present for the people we love and for ourselves. Another key takeaway was learning to be kinder to myself. I had always been my harshest critic, quick to judge every misstep, every perceived failure. But through the pages of that book, I began to cultivate self-compassion. I learned to speak to myself with the same kindness and understanding I would offer a friend. And in doing so, I started to heal the relationship I had with myself. I don't want to paint a picture of perfect recovery, because healing is never linear. There are still days when the old doubts creep in, when the weight of expectations feels heavy. But now, I have the tools to navigate those moments. I have the strength to recognize that I am more than my achievements, more than my titles, more than the roles I play. If you're reading this and feel like you're standing at the edge of your own midlife crisis, wondering if there's a way out, I want you to know that there is. And I truly believe that depression and the midlife crisis for high-achieving men can be the guide you need. It was for me. It helped me not only survive but thrive in ways I never thought possible. You can get a digital copy at libraryffy.com. It's not just a book, it's a companion, a roadmap, and a lifeline. If you're ready to take that first step, I encourage you to dive in. Your journey to healing and rediscovery starts here.